Welcome to Roots of Faith Ancestry. I'm Renee Richard, and I'm here with Judy Riffle and Leonard Smith III. And today's subject matter, today's episode is going to be on getting started doing your genealogy. And I can't reiterate enough, they make it look easy on some of these shows, but it is time-consuming and tedious, and we're going to start the process rolling with the very basis on where we're going to begin.
Okay. Well, you know, I actually like to start, I have three basic steps that I actually follow. And one of them is always start with yourself. You know more about yourself than anyone else. You can actually sit down and log what you know about yourself. And you start off with your birth record. You know, you can say, okay, I was born such and such a date. You can say, okay, my parents are. So you want the who, what, when, where, and how. And it normally works out pretty good for you because now you're building your tree first. And that's always a good starting point. Always start with yourself. Second one is actually to gather family information that you have around your house, or around you, or your relatives that you are actually, like your parents. You might say, okay, there's a family Bible somewhere. I always reference the family Bible because there's, in many cases, that grandmother or grandparent or great-grandparent may have actually logged something in that Bible that may be of importance to you when you do your research. So that's the two big steps that I like to start off with. And then, of course, the third one is to interview your oldest living relative. Now, of course, you can interview your non-living relative, but we won't get into that.
Talking to yourself.
Yeah, but you want to go with the oldest living relative, and it doesn't have to be a grandparent. If you do have grandparents, that's fantastic. But in my case, I actually only had one grandparent, well, two grandparents that actually lived that I could have actually interviewed, which I did. But on my paternal side, my grandfather I was only 2 years old when he passed. And actually, I never knew my grandmother on that side. So it's great that you actually have someone you can talk to. And it could be an older aunt or uncle, or someone who lived in that period of time that you're actually trying to research back. But again, you start with yourself, move back to your parents. Anything you know about your parents that you might know when they were married, or when was the first child born. You want to put all of that, which is called vital records, down of your family history. And from that, you can take that information and you're going to log in. We're going to talk about the sheets or the documents that you actually want to put that information on. But that's the starting point. There's only 3 steps, and most people make it complicated, but those 3 steps are important. And again, you are number one. It's you first, and then you work from there.
And if you document yourself, you might say, oh, this is so silly. I know about me, but you never know when something's going to happen, and you're going to your kids might need your records, and be able to go get them. Because honestly, even asking your parents, well, where exactly did y'all get married? I mean, I know they were married, but do you really I never knew really,
That's right.
Okay, so where exactly did you get married? Just having that, can help too. So yeah, starting with yourself.
Yeah, and by all means, you want to put information like if, you have in the birth record, you might have what priests may have baptized. Your baptismal records are important too. But anybody who baptized you, who were witnesses there, if there's photographs to support that. As I said before, my ultimate goal is to always look toward the document because I want to do a documentary on that family. Mm-hmm. And so if I have visuals that will support the story, those are all great as well. And so you also want to make sure that those photographs that you find, that you have dates on the back of them and where they were located, what church it was, and the priest, and you can even put other people who were in attendance.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, all that's important because, again, you're building the story.
Yeah, there's no such thing as too much writing.
That's right. That's
no
right.
such thing as too
That's
much
right.
writing. If, to get down so that later down the road, if somebody else acquires that, my worst nightmare is to get photographs from aunts and uncles and stuff, and there's nothing on the back of them.
That's right.
The documents on the back of them is enough to tell you the story of a lot of things that are lost now.
Well, how many boxes did you get from people with pictures? And it's like, okay, now who is this? And that happens to all of us, down through the years. And you may have said, oh, I remember that time. But as time go on, you forget those things. And it's like, okay, I know that I was there, but I don't remember exactly where it was. And I have a sibling that's pretty good with that. But, a lot of times you don't know. And you look at the clothing, you look for clues. You might look for an old car that might be in it. And you say, okay, we had that car. But now you're going into a range. You're not going in specifically those days that actually happened. And again, and we'll get into a little bit more about how I shoot my photographs, because I like to shoot landscape because I want to see what's in the background. You know, those old houses that may be in that photograph with people outside is important to tell the story. Because I build storylines, lifelines, and timelines, and that's how I actually do a documentary. But the storylines are, like I say, start with yourself. You are the first part of that storyline, and that's your storyline.
That's good about the pictures.
Okay.
You know, to look at what's, to mentally, you know, document what's in a picture. That's kind of cool. So what's next?
Well,
So we go.
I say, as I say before, you always remember to record and I got it written down here because it's one of those catches that the what, when, where, how, and who was there.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the important. If you handle all of those questions, you actually will cover
Everything.
the whole episode.
The whole
you know,
episode.
yeah, and you know that you've actually documented that, and you can actually work with that toward doing the documentary or a book. You know, a lot of cases people want to write a book and they don't know where to start. Well, again, your story is the first book, should be the first chapter in the book, and then you work from there. And then, of course, once you put the book together, you can move your chapter around anywhere you want to.
That's
you
right.
know, but you want to actually get as much information that you have firsthand that you can get your hands on, and just sit in a quiet room if you have to, put on some nice music, drink coffee, whatever you do, and actually just log all what you found. And once you log it, you'll be surprised the stories that come out of that.
True.
And that's important.
And, you know, when you're interviewing, like you were saying, it doesn't have to be a grandparent per se, you know, if you don't have grandparents. And think outside of the box, folks, because if you don't have grandparents and you don't have older aunts and uncles, you can actually go talk to your grandparents' best friends.
Yes.
Anybody of those older generations that can shed light on who your ancestors were, you want to document. And the other thing to be really important is, like you were saying, the who, document, the who, what, when, where. Parts of it are extremely important, because also document who might be in the room with you when you're doing that interview. Biggest mistake I ever made one time, we're going to talk about mistakes. We all make them. We all forget to document. We're going to talk a whole subject line on that. Was I didn't put down the little lady. She was a sitter for my grandmother, and I was interviewing her for her life as much as my grandmother's. Did not put her last name down. Had a heck of a time. She died. I had no idea where to go look for her obituary to find out more information about her. So I was lucky. I had 4 grandparents, you know, that were alive until I was well and married. My problem was I really wasn't interested in recording any of that until I got married, and they were still alive, so I had some time. And I had one grandfather that flat out refused to talk to me whatsoever. I mean, his philosophy was the past is dead and gone. You can find pirates and reprobates. So
And you know what,
don't go there.
That is important, too, because in some cases you will interview elders, and they will not want to talk about the past. And you don't force them. You actually continue with that, but you actually, okay, if you're not comfortable with it, then we won't talk about it. But you can find someone else, and as time come on, you'll be surprised that they will come back to you and say, oh, you're still doing that story, or you're still talking about, and then they'll start giving at their own good time. And you know, when you interview people, you want to have just an everyday conversation. You don't want to be structured. You want to just like you sitting there and over coffee, if that's what you drink, and just talk about what was it like when you were growing up. You know, what was it like when you lived there? And you know, tell me a little bit about the family that you remember.
And the other thing, too, is how you go about getting it. You know, are you writing it, like, while they're talking, or do you record them? I had a grandmother that refused. She was blind, but she could hear that click on that tape recorder, so help me God. And so in my case, in this day and time, anybody that's got an iPhone, you have a voice recorder on your iPhone that you can record, and you can even pause it if you want to, you know, stop and go fill the cup of coffee up. And people don't even realize that that's an app on there that's greatly utilized. Because it's the details you might forget when you're just hand writing down the key points. I wish I could have fooled my grandmother. She was an ace in the hole, boy. I mean, I had it in my pocket. I bought a mini one. I mean, it was useless in terms of that.
Well, the iPhone is great because you can put the phone on the airport mode, and then that way you won't get anyone to interrupt you when you're actually recording. And I have used that so many times that I've actually been in concerts where I was actually recording the concert, and I would actually record the audio so I can actually lay the whole audio track down. But it's the same thing when you're interviewing people. You can actually, it's so, I guess it's not so obvious as opposed to you coming in with a digital camera or a digital recorder. If you just put the phone right on the table there and just start a conversation. And that's what I like. I just like the conversation.
Some people won't talk to us and you know you're being recorded, so but it's great. You can stick it in your pocket or whatever. But then you've got a more detailed record too. And what you think, you know, oh, I got it all on paper, and you listen to it as I did with my other grandmother, and it was amazing how many little nuances I picked up. I mean, I still go visit old relatives, family, for anytime I hear somebody in a nursing home that's clear mind, that knew what life was like or knew my grandparents, I'm quick to go run, you know, to talk to them just for the tales that they might be able to tell me about them. I met a man in Pierreport that was 94 years old that knew my great-grandfather, and that's the first-hand account I had of what he was like, and it was amazing, you know, so I can't, like you said, you can't stress enough, you know, of starting with yourself, getting it written down, you know, interviewing anybody and everybody you can.
That's right.
The other thing you might want to bring to mind is that there are libraries. If your grandparents lived not with you or not in your area, they're deceased or whatever the case might be, there's a lot of historical societies that have interviewed people years ago that have records of their audios in the libraries. Assumption Parish has it, Terrebonne Parish has it. You never know. It might be your grandmother, it might be your great-grandmother, and you never even knew it was there. But somebody in the community had the foresight to go and interview them, whether it was about what life was like, but there's so much genealogy information sometimes in those interviews. It's really amazing. So, did you know your grandparents?
Yes, I knew 3 of my grandparents, and one of my grandparents lived with us, and she lived to be 95, so I was able to talk to her quite a bit. I sat down with all of her old photographs, and I had her identify most of them. Unfortunately, there were a few I forgot to write down. We all make those mistakes. And I recorded some Cajun songs she sang.
Wow, amazing.
Unbeknownst to her, but I did record them. I hid the tape recorder
plenty of times.
because she was intimidated by the tape recorder.
That's what I found.
So I taped her singing some songs, and those are
How
very
precious to have your
rare.
grandmother's voice on tape.
I sure do.
Wow. So what happens when we know, you got to migrate that. You know how to do that. I don't. Folks, we're going to go to break now, and then we'll be back to lay out all the stuff that we've been talking about and get it into a format that you can understand in a tree.
Hi, this is Deacon Jody Moscona. Join me for Catholic Life, ordinary people with extraordinary faith. These are your friends, your neighbors, members of your parish, and of course, the shakers and movers of Baton Rouge. That's Catholic Life, ordinary people with extraordinary faith.
Attention Roku users, you can now subscribe to Catholic Life Television's channel on your Roku device. Watch our live 24-hour broadcast as well as on-demand viewing of locally produced programming from the Diocese of Baton Rouge. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy Catholic Life Television, available on Roku.
Welcome back. We've been sitting talking this first segment about gathering information and getting the ball started and rolling, and now we want to document it on paper. So Judy's going to outline how we go about doing that and onto an actual family tree chart.
Okay, well, we have 2 basic forms that we use in genealogy to organize all that data we've been collecting, because it gets to be quite a lot after a while. The first one that we use is called a family tree chart. It's also called a pedigree chart, an ancestry chart. It goes by many different names. It's all the same basic form. We start with ourself, because that's where we start with our genealogy. We start with ourself, and our name goes on this first line on the far left. And then the next 2 lines over are for our father and our mother. Now the father's name always goes on the top line and the mother's name on the bottom line. And then we go out further to the right, we have their parents. So these are your grandparents, the paternal grandparents on the top and the maternal grandparents on the bottom. And then we go out 1 more generation on this chart. This is a 4-generation chart for our great-grandparents. And if we're lucky enough to know further than that, we can continue them on the next chart. Now, this chart has room for you to put all those who, what, when, where, and all the locations information underneath each name. You've got a space for birth date, marriage date, death date, and of course location. Now, when we're doing our genealogy, we don't just look at our own ancestors, just our ancestors. We look at the brothers and sisters, the aunts and uncles, the cousins, and we need a form to organize that information. And what we have here is called a family group sheet, or family group details. And this is where you put in the father's name on the top, the mother's name on the next line, and then you have space for the children listed underneath. This particular form has 6 lines for the children, but
I know.
in Louisiana,
In Louisiana, my favorite one has 11.
we need more lines than that. But what we have, what we're lucky enough to have, is computer programs these days that we can input all this data in computer and then print out a sheet every time we make a mistake or we need to change something, and we will make mistakes and we will need to change things. So then what the computer program does is makes that change, and you can print out a fresh new form. And I have an example here of one that's been filled out. I use a program called Brother's Keeper. It's been around quite a while. It's shareware. You can download it for free. Of course, you can register it and pay a fee if you want, but it's free if you just want to try it out. And I printed out a pedigree chart starting with my grandfather here to show his line going out 4 generations. And I've also printed out here on the Brother's Keeper program a family group sheet starting with my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, and they had 11 children, so I needed to fill that all out there. And I know some of you use genealogy programs. You don't have to have a computer program to organize your data. You can use these blank forms, which you can download for free online. I recommend you use pencil to fill them out because you're going to have to make changes and make corrections. But if you're a computer person and you like using computers, there's lots of programs out there. Some of them are free. I know, Renee, you've used a computer program.
Right. We were talking. We all have different ones.
We all use a different one.
I have Family Tree Maker.
Okay, I actually use, and actually I've tried most of them, I guess, but Brothers Keepers, I've never actually tried that one. But I've actually used Roots Web. I've actually used Family Tree. And I've actually used on different platforms, the Mac and the PC. I've used Reunion. And I guess what always drives me to the one I really want to use is the one that does the best reports. And that's the important part, because that, I want reports to look decent, that kind of thing. So Roots Web is where I'm at now. So that may change, but I'm running a Mac, and I'm running it in the a Windows version because it doesn't come off of Mac, but I'm running it on my Mac using Windows.
Okay. As I said, this is our technical expert. There are some of us that I use a computer, but really I like my filled out by hand ones, and we'll show it. You can fill them out. You don't have to use the computer to write on them by hand. And in my case, I put mine in plastic sleeves and just take them out as needed. So I do have it in the computer, but it's not necessary. And so there's got to be people, that want them hand. And I don't look at that for the programs. I choose mine by how it looks, how it feels to me. I want to see as much material as possible up in front of me, and that's important. So everybody's going to have their own ideas about how they want to do it, and you may have to play around with it. You might not want to jump out and buy a computer program. Yours is great. I didn't know that was free. I'm going to go download it and play with it, except that I have a Mac. I don't think it runs.
No, it doesn't.
Well, what's nice about that is that most of the time there's a trial version anyway that you can try. It could be 10 days, it could be 14 days, but once you actually load that trial version, you want to go ahead and try it out and see if it fits for you. It's just like a car, buying a car. You got to just make sure that it works for you. Yeah. And so there's a lot of them out there, and every year there's probably a new model that comes out. So you actually have to just get in there and work with it, and then you'll find the one that actually suits you better. Yeah.
That's it. And if you do subscribe to like Ancestry.com too, you can load your tree or upload a tree, or put it in on that. I know I have mine on my iPad. And as a matter of fact, when we got ready for the show, and they said, "Oh, bring an image from Family Tree Maker," I had we have Macs now in the house, and I had an old HP, laptop, and it froze up. And then I noticed it was Family Tree Maker 2008. It was like, okay, I need to get with the program here. So my little buddy here, and when the show is over, you won't help me, buddy. We're gonna fix me up.
But you know, a lot of times there's revisions, and the revisions are not major. So they might have 2008, 2009. It may have only been a change in a maybe a look or something like that. So it's not always that you have to buy the latest and greatest. As long as it works for you, that's the most important part.
I know, but my old computer froze up, and
But
we've
that's
got
a
Macs now,
different
so
story.
now I got to start shopping for a new program.
Right.
So
Well, the computer, it has to work.
it
So,
has,
yeah.
the computer has to work to do this. So anyhow, I have a quick.
Well, I would want to add that you want to make sure you get a program that you can transfer the data from one program to another in case you don't like the one that you've entered all these thousands of names in and you don't like it anymore. If it has something called GEDCOM,
Yes.
you can convert the data to GEDCOM and transfer it to another program. So you want, when you're selecting a genealogy program, you want to make sure that you pick one that has that ability so that you're not stuck with it and you would have to input all that data into another program again.
right.
So you want to make sure that it has that.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a little break, and we'll come back, and we're going to go into how we document what we find when we come back after this break.
Hello everyone, I'm Shannon Acord and this is Colette Keith, and we're talking about Veritas Vitae, a brand new show that's going to talk about the sacredness of God's gift of life from conception to natural death and every stage in between.
We'll be discussing human trafficking to abortion to hunger. So tune in every week to see these episodes and learn how we're all connected by these issues and learn about the power of God's truth.
Do you need a little light in your life? Tune in to the next episode of Beacons of Light, where we'll share the story of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul in action, serving God's poor and homeless. We'll share stories of our volunteers and our supporters, making the gospel come to life for those in need.
God's way is my way, God's shield is around.
Watch our programming on demand anytime at CatholicLifeTV.org.
I'm Eddie Wright from St. Jean-Vianney Parish in Baton Rouge, and you're watching Catholic Life Television.
Welcome back. And we've been gathering information, and we've been getting it written down on paper or some format or entered in a computer. But none of this does, I shouldn't say doesn't do a lot of good, but it's really very important that we document as we go along. And I can't stress the importance of documenting enough. And as a nurse, I know all about documenting. But in genealogy, it's a little bit different. It's putting down where that information, just like Leonard said in the beginning, it's the who, what, when, where, for everything that you've got. So you have a record that you found. Your source is that record, and you want to put down where that information you got, so it gets kind of confusing, but say you find a reference for your grandfather's birth, and you find it in a book, and it's in English typed up and transcribed, then that book is your source for that record. Now, if that, for instance, so you would put whatever that book is, and Leonard taught me a trick about photographing the cover, but if you put who wrote the book, or who the person is you're documenting, again, where you found it, that book, when it took place, when that book was published. Like, you can photograph the inside cover page and the outside of the cover page and mark the page number. You always want to know that. Mm-hmm. And it might refer you to another document, like his birth certificate or his baptism record. It would be important to get to the most original source you can for that person.
Right.
Again. So again, it might be a different citation or a different notation. If you come to the Catholic Diocese and you look up that baptism record and they show you your grandfather's record and it took place in this particular church, you would do the same thing again. You'd put what book you got it out of, where you were, the Catholic Diocese, the page number that you got to verify that that is your information. And the reason for doing this is your proof This is in the event that somebody comes up to you and says, well, I don't have that information I have. He was born 2 days before, 2 days after. It's not you that made that mistake. You want to be able to go to that, that book or that reference site and say, well, let's see, why is there a discrepancy? You may have 2 records that both have the different dates on them. You know, in that case, you might want to record both and just put down where that information came from. That's all documenting what you've got. But it's your proof, it's your validity. And again, when you're out on the internet and you're pulling somebody's tree off of the internet, or even somebody gives you a family tree and says, here's your grandfather's family tree, take it at face value. It's great, it's a tool, it's information. But if they don't have where they got that record from, your work is cut out for you, because you have to go now and find where the record came from to verify that that really is your grandfather. And I'll be perfectly honest, there have been many times where we have not documented, and I have not documented, and I've also been fooled. Someone gave us my grandfather's genealogy, and it was great. I went to the Congrès Mon Dieu and I brought it and found out that that whole line was not my grandfather. There were 3 Emile Boudreaux born in Napoleonville, Louisiana in a 3-year span. And then my work was cut out for me finding which Emile was, which of the other 3 or 4 was actually my great-grandfather, and I had to start over. So when someone gives you, or for whatever reason, off the internet,
That's right.
take it at face value. It might be great, but it might not be. And that's where the documentation is so very important. And not only that, to pass it down the line to others. It gives you verification.
Well, you know, a lot of times that's a starting point for you. You know, if you get a record from someone else, you need to know that, okay, I did get, this is a good document that I have, but it may not be a good one, like you said before. So, you know, I've always liked to have supporting documents. You know, I like to find 2 or 3 documents that says the same thing, especially when it comes to births and dates and that type of stuff. Then I can say, okay, this is probably a good document. You know, but if I get a date here and I get a date there, and it's like, okay, you don't meet in the happy medium in the middle, but what you do is look for supporting documents. And again, it gets back to the original documents. Those are always the best ones to have.
And if you can't get there, the important thing in all this, we could talk literally for days on documentation. And you can go on the website, and it's great. You can just Google documenting my sources and find 2 and 3 different websites that enable you to do that. But if you can just remember to document, just write it down. It doesn't matter. You know, write down where you got it, who you got it, where you got it from, and who you with. Just write, and hopefully you've covered your bases.
And rinse and repeat.
So, we are done for today, and join us back on Roots of Faith Ancestry next week, and we'll be going to census records.